Welcome everybody again. Good afternoon. This is Pavel Palash from GREYCORTEX. And I would like to introduce you Michal Shrubaš, head of our customer and support department. Michal is also leading a team of our security analysts that does manage service operations at tens of end users, and he and his team have been at the front line of fighting cybercrime and state-sponsored hackers at many customers over the past years. And this webinar will be recorded, so you'll get the recording in the next couple of days. And feel free to enter your questions into the question and answer tab. We'll try to answer them in line or in text as we go, and we can also address them towards the end of the presentation. So welcome again, and Misha, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Pavel, for your introduction. Hello, everyone, again. And let me start with the presentation. The first thing I will show you is the agenda for today's webinar. In today's webinar, we will be presenting few of the typical use cases that you will face or you will get in touch when you are doing network security audit. And we will be presenting these use cases on an examples using our product that we're developing for network security audits, which is GREYCORTEX Mendel, which is in category of network traffic analysis tools. At the end of the webinar, I will do a slight comparison with the penetration testing that you might be already familiar with. At the beginning, I will show you or tell you how it actually works. If you want to do or perform a network security audit, the first thing that you have to figure it out is how to get the network information about your infrastructure. In our case, or for our product, we are using mirror traffic. So we are usually taking the mirror traffic from core switches, core routers, or other active network devices on the network. We are able to collect them from multiple places of the network. So we are basically able to see almost entire network communication that is happening in an infrastructure that we are auditing. Let me have a look first at the visibility, because this is the very important part of every network security audit. Before you start auditing a network, you first have to know what is connected in that network. What kind of devices are connected there, how are they grouped together, and so on. In a typical infrastructure today, there are mobile devices like laptop computers, mobile phones, tablets, and possibly some others. There are usually devices that are used for helping the employees with their work, like printers, multifunction devices, and so on. There are also devices in an offices like desktop computers, laptop, and some others. And usually there are some critical devices, like, for example, production servers that are running or maintaining your domain where your computers are connected into. There can be databases where you are storing your critical data, like, for example, information about your customers, information about credit cards, and possibly some other sensitive data that shouldn't be exposed to public. During auditing, it's very helpful to have a tool which is able to identify those assets on your network, classify them into the groups, so you can ask difficult questions like, for example, who is connecting to my server where I am storing some sensitive information, like, for example, files about, let's say, financial results, for example. With our tool Mendel, it's very easy to answer those questions because we are monitoring the entire network traffic and we are storing this information for a long period of time. So we are capable of answering exactly those questions. And that's basically not all, because every infrastructure today is connected to some other networks, like, for example, internet. So we are not only monitoring how are your devices communicating with each other, but we are also monitoring how are they communicating with systems in the internet, and not just in the internet, but also who is connecting from the internet to your devices in your infrastructure. So, for example, if you'd like to know who is connecting the remote desktop in your offices or in your servers, it's very easy to find out this information from a network traffic. I will show you a few examples a couple of slides back. Another thing that network security audit and network monitoring is capable of giving you is the information about how your assets or devices are communicating with each other. What kind of protocols are they using? What data is transferred from one device to another? Where or when exactly did it happen? And what else happened during that communication? Those are typical questions that you will be asking during the network auditing, and you should have a tool that is capable of answering those questions. Let me jump right on the first use case that we will talk about, and those are changes on the network. When you are doing monitoring of the network traffic or auditing of an infrastructure from a network point of view, network changes are definitely one of the use cases or let's say problems that or domain that you will be looking at. You should definitely be noticed about, for example, changes like adding a new VLAN or a communication from an IP range that is not very unknown for the network itself. You should be able to also identify what kind of new devices had been connected into the network. For example, if your employee brings his own laptop or his own device and connected a protected office network, you should know about this. Another typical example can be changes about new services on the network. That means notification about new servers that are providing some services to the network or to some other devices on the internet. We will have a look at the first example. I will use this link to open up our system Mendel, and I will show you one of the findings that we have found during the investigation and during the network security auditing. Right now, we have opened our system. We are looking on the events tab, which is giving us a list of events that has been detected on the network of a customer. And we are looking at a specific date, which was the 6th of September 2020. As you can see, there is a lot of events detected on this day, and we will have a look at the first one. The first event is giving you the information that the system, Mendel, has detected a new local service on the network that appeared, and this service is forbidden to communicate on the local or even external network. That's the reason why the system detected this behavior, because this is something new, and it's also forbidden by the policy that was defined by the administrator. In the detail of this event, we can see that the system is giving us information about two IP addresses, 227 and 105. Maybe I will make it a bit bigger so you can see it. I will use this show more details button have a look at the details of this communication so I can find out and I can discover what exactly happened and why the system is alerting me about this. As you can see from the flows of this communication, we can very easily identify that there is some French IP address that had been connecting to our internal IP address in our internal network. As you can see, the communication went to port 3389, which is typically used for the RDP or remote desktop protocol. From the number of packets that has been transferred from the source, that's the French IP address, to the destination, we can be sure that a session has been established there, or at least there was an attempt to establish a session. In this particular case, we cannot see any application data because it has been taken from the customer data and anonymized it. So we cannot see, for example, a username that has been used during this attempt to connect to the RDP protocol. But in a normal deployment, you would be able to see the usernames and possibly some other application information from this particular connection. So this is one of the examples of how the system can help you to identify those network changes and something that you should definitely know about when you are monitoring your infrastructure. Maybe let me show you another kind of events that are considered as a changes on the network. Let me use this filter called event, which will filter some specific events for us that are happening on the network. I will use the keyword discovery because all the events that are notifying some changes on the network has the discovery prefix. So that will show us only this discovery events. And also let me change the time range. So we are not looking just on the single day, but we will look at an entire week. So let me change the time span. And as you can see, there is a bit more events. And let me just very briefly to introduce you a couple of them. For example, you can see that there is a event with the title Discovery New Printer. This specific event is able to give you the information that there is some new printer connected into your network. Or there is, for example, event that is giving you the information that there is some new SSH system. So that means that somebody or some host has started to serving as a SSH server and somebody else is trying to connect to it on your network. Another kind of event that can be, for example, detected are requests and non-existing service. That means that the system is telling you that there are some hosts on your network that are trying to connect to some service on some other systems, but this service is not giving any responses. That means that you can very easily to identify that some service on your local network stopped working, or either the system has been disconnected from the network or lost the network connectivity. So in this particular example, you can see that the system is saying that there are 25 IP addresses that are trying to connect to those two IP addresses using ports 445, which is usually used for SMB, and also some port number 8013. Maybe there is one more that I can show you, and that's the discovery of a new VLAN, for example. If an administrator decides to add a new VLAN or configure a new VLAN, that's also an information that other administrators or other members of your security team should be aware of. And this is something that you should know about. So those were just a few examples of changes that the system is able to identify on the network. And you should, if you are doing monitoring of the network, you should definitely be notified about those changes, because this is something that's happening on the network basically every single day. Let me get back to the presentation, and let's move to another interesting topic, and that's verification of critical communication. In every infrastructure, you will find critical systems. It can be either an active directory that is responsible for maintaining a domain of Windows machines. It can be servers that are hosting backups of your critical data, or it can be possibly some other critical devices, like if we would be talking about hospitals, it can be systems that are, for example, taking the pictures like röntgens, or PAC systems that are storing those images to databases. Those systems should be automatically identified on the network, and the system somehow should be able to give you the information about who is connecting to those devices, where are they connecting, what are they downloading from the internet, for example, and so on. Those are typical questions that you will be asking if you are doing an audit of critical devices. Let me show you an example how is this done in our system. Right now, we jumped again back to Mendel, and we are looking at the network tab, which is giving us or providing us views, certain views of network communication. And in this case, we are looking at the hosts view, which is giving us the information about particular systems on the network. On the left, you can notice that there is a host tag, which is a filter that we applied on this view. And this filter is saying that we want to just see systems on the network that are acting like Active Directory domain controllers. The reason we can that easily have a look at domain controllers is because Mendel is automatically detecting critical devices and critical systems on the network, and he's automatically giving some tag to them. So, for example, if I show you some other things that could be filtered, so you can see that we are able to identify, for example, DNS server, databases, mail servers, proxy servers, and possibly some others. Let me, for example, show you the DNS servers. As you can see, there are still those two IP addresses that we had already seen, but there is one more that appeared and it wasn't there before. If I click on this IP address, I will get just some basic host information about like what kind of operating system is this system running, when it was discovered for the first time. I can also give it some my personal description to it, and I can also use some third-party information databases if I would like to look up this IP address in some other sources. But this could be most likely used when we are investigating an IP address that is living in the internet. Maybe let me get back. I will show you this magical button, which is called the filter, and I will use it. And you can notice that this IP address was put into the filter, and we will filter communication just of this device. And we will have a look at the communication matrix of this specific device. For this to show, I will use another view, which is called peers. And this view will show me how this system is communicating with other systems, either in the internal network or with other systems in the internet and possibly some other networks. As you can see from this graph, this DNS server is probably used as a DNS server in the internal infrastructure, because you can see there is a lot of internal systems that are communicating with this system, and it looks like this system is not communicating to the internet at all. Maybe let me just check it out. I will use the traffic filter, which is outbound, and this traffic filter will tell the system that we are only interested in the communication that is going from this source IP address to some other networks, like for example the internet. So let me filter that, and we see that the system is telling us that there is no outgoing communication from this particular IP address. Maybe let me delete this IP address and let me filter it again, so we can see basically the entire infrastructure, a few devices in it, and how are they communicating to the internet. So I will pick one of them. Let's say this one. I will again use the to filter button, and let's see at this communication. As you can see on the left, we can see that this specific host is communicating to the internet a lot. We can see that there is a lot of domains that are hosting probably Windows updates. I also see an ESET. So it looks like there is a ESET antivirus installed on the system. And on the right, you can see all the other ASNs that the system is communicating with. So it's, for example, communicating with Microsoft, it's communicating to Amazon, Akamai, ESET, and possibly some others. If you would be interested, if this system is, for example, connecting somewhere using the SMB protocol, I can simply use this service filter. I will type SMB in it, and I will delete the outgoing filter, so we can see whether this system is using the SMB or not. And as you can see from this communication, the system is giving us the information that this particular host is using the SMB protocol to connect the IP address 192 and 255 at the end, which is probably the broadcast IP address of the VLAN or the subnet that the IP address is sitting in. So it's probably doesn't have any direct connections, but it's trying to look for shares on the network using the broadcasting search, which is the Windows functionality. So this peers view is basically a very nice view of how to give you the information of a communication matrix of specific systems, or you can also filter the entire VLAN. You can filter specific protocols, specific kind of events, and so on. So this can be used to answer all of the different questions that you might have about who is communicating with who, how many data was transferred during this communication, and so on. Let me get back to the presentation, and we will move to another use case, which is malware, exploits, attacker presence, and all this malicious behavior. With malware today, if one of your devices in your internal infrastructure get infected with a device, there is a very high chance that this infection will somehow be indicated in a network communication, because sooner or later the malware itself will try to either exfiltrate some data that it collected on the internal network or on the infected device, or it will try to get some instructions from the command and control server that is basically controlling the malware. So in both cases, this has to happen over the network, and it can be, or it's possible to somehow detect this kind of communication from the network traffic. I will show you a few typical use cases that we had found during the auditing, or typical use cases that we can see today when we are performing audit of the network communication for our customers. The first one is detection of a known threat. So let me use this link to again get to our system and to show you a specific example of a device that had been infected in the infrastructure that we were monitoring. So let's wait for a second. It looks like it got stuck, so I will reload it. Okay, now it's worked. Great. In this case, we are again looking at the events tab, and we can see one specific event that had been identified on a specific IP address. And this event is giving us the information that there is probably some Trojan horse infection on the infected device, and it sending some suspicious post information about the common Windows process names. And it looks like the malware is trying to exfiltrate the list of processes running on this specific Windows machine. From the detail, we can see that the communication is happening from this IP address in the internal network, and the communication is happening on this blacklisted IP address, which is in Asia. And we can also see that this communication is happening on the port 8082, which is not very usual for communication today. And we can also see that the system has identified HTTP protocol in this communication. Even though it's not a standard port that is used for web communication, our system is using deep packet inspection, and that's the reason why it was able to identify the HTTP protocol in this particular communication. Let me now show you some details that the system was able to identify. Probably the very interesting thing is the packet byte section, because this section is showing you some snippet of packet that was transferred from the infected device and was sending the data to the internet. If you are familiar with the HTTP protocol, you will very quickly identify that it's using a post method. It's using the HTTP 1.1 version of the HTTP protocol. And if we scroll a bit down, we can notice strings like task list. And you can also see that there are some strings like winlogon.exe. There are some others. And if you are familiar with internals of Windows, you can very quickly find out that this is basically the list of processes that is running on the device in our infrastructure that got infected. If we get to the end of this packet, we can notice strings like system information. You can see strings like host names, Windows version, and so on. So this is basically, this infected device is basically sending information about itself, and it's sending those information to some server in the internet. The server in the internet is a command and control server, which is basically waiting for this information to find out what is the infected device, what can I do with it, and the infected device is just waiting for instructions from the internet what it should do next, whether it should leak some other interesting information that it found on the infected data, or maybe it's waiting for a ransomware to be delivered on this particular system, so it can encrypt any possible sensitive information that are on the system, or either on the network shares that are connected to this internal IP address. So this was just an example of how a known threat can be identified from a network traffic, because this threat was identified based on a signature that you can see right here. It was basically looking for some specific strings in the communication, and the system found them. So that's how the system recognized that this device is probably infected, and that there is something wrong happening with this communication. Let me get back to the presentation because there are some more examples of typical attacks and typical malicious behavior that you can notice from the network communication. Another example that I will show you is periodic outgoing communication, because this is something that is not a signature-based detection, but it's rather using a network behavior detection. That means that our system is looking how your devices in your infrastructure is typically behave, and when there is something that is not very usual for them, or something that looks like a machine or malicious program is generating this communication, then the system is able to reveal this communication and identify it as potentially malicious. In this specific case, the system is giving you the information that it has detected some periodic communication that was happening every 30 minutes in 6 hours. And you can also see from the graph that it was happening regularly. And from the detail, we can see the IP address, which is the initiator of the communication. And we can also see the destination. You can see that the system detected that this periodic communication is happening with those 5 IP addresses, which are located in Poland. And you can also see that it identified that it's trying to communicate to some weird port number 113, which is not very usual for network communication today to the internet, because usually normal devices that are used by employees, which are using just web browsers, emails, and possibly some video conference software, they are typically using port numbers like 80, 443, 9, and 93 for the email services, and some others. The port number 113 is not very usual for the network communication itself. Let me get back on this slide and let me show you some another use cases that are still very common and that can be very easily identified from the network traffic. One of them are, for example, brute force attacks. Brute force attacks are still very usual today. Those kind of attacks, their main goal is to usually guess a password for a specific account. In this particular case, we had detected that there has been an SSH dictionary brute force attack, which was happening again from a Polish IP address to an IP address in an internal network. So it means that somebody from the internet was trying to guess the password of our internal system. We will very quickly look at the flows of the communication so you can see how the attack was performed. In this table, you can see lots of flows. That means basically every flow is representing a couple of guesses of a specific passwords for a specific username. As you can see from the network communication, if you are familiar with the TCP protocol, you can see very easily that in all the cases, the handshake has been performed properly, and there are multiple packets transferred during this communication. If we have a look at example of, for example, this flow, we can see either some information from the application layer of this communication. So we can see that software version that has been used for this attack was some lib SSH 052, which is not something that is very usual for either the Windows systems or Linux systems, but it's usually used in a tools which their primary goal is to perform those brute force attacks. So from this communication and this information that we can see right now, it's very easy for a security person to find out that there is something wrong happening with this specific communication. So this was an example of a typical brute force attack that can happen on the network, that can happen from the internet to your services that are publicly available, for example, in the DMZ. And it can either happen in the internal network. Let me get back to presentation. I think it's enough about the malware for now. And let me move to another kind of typical use case that you will face during network auditing, and that's verification of security policies. Security policies should be defined by administrators together with security people, and during the auditing, you definitely should know what kind of policies are defined and applied for the specific infrastructure that you're auditing, and you should have a tool that will help you with those kind of policies to verify whether they are happening or not. During the audits that we done in, let's say, last 5 years, we wrote down a couple of typical policies that can be found out from the network traffic. The first one is communication between critical network segments and other systems. That's where the Pierce graph is very useful, because the Pierce graph that I showed a couple of slides back can very quickly show you what kind of segments are communicating with each other. For example, during the auditing, we had a customer that had a restaurant in the building, and this restaurant was providing public and private Wi-Fi access for their customers of the restaurant. And the password for the private network, for the private Wi-Fi network, was written on the menu. So basically everybody can just went to the restaurant, get some meal, connect to the network, check emails, and so on. What we found out was that it was possible to connect from this Wi-Fi to other segments of the network, and even the critical segments of the network. So it was, for example, possible to print some documents on the printers that were on the second floor of the building, where you had no access for normal users. You could also connect to some internal web servers. For example, the internet web servers that were giving information for regular employees. There was no problem to connect to those systems. So everybody in the cafe who performed some sort of scanning on the network and discovered those devices was able to connect to them, which was not very good. Another typical policy is to be able to watch the privilege AD account usage. In the typical attack, the golden ticket of the privilege AD accounts is the main goal of the attacker, because if they are able to obtain this kind of ticket, they are able to log to every other computer that is connected to the domain. So those are very high targets for the attackers. And I will show you an example how you can use our system to track those specific AD accounts on the network. How are they used, on which systems they are used, who is connecting with them, and so on. In this case, you can see another event that was triggered by our system. In this case, it was just attempt of a connection from blacklisted IP addresses to some internal system. But what's important in here is this information, this last column that is giving you the information about the user, in our case, Michelle Harris, that was logged in on the computer with the host name M. Harris during this particular event was triggered. So if you connect our system with Active Directory, we are able to show you what domain accounts were logged on which devices. So it's no problem to create specific alerts that will alert you about the using of administrator accounts that you will define in the system. Possibly there are some other typical policies that can be watched on the network. One of them can be, for example, plain text authentication, which can also be seen still today, either in the internal infrastructure, but we still see this kind of authentication even to the systems that are in the DMZ. So publicly available web servers, for example, or email servers, which you can access using just plain HTTP protocol and not HTTPS. Another policy breach can be, for example, usage of unencrypted protocols or even protocols that are considered as deprecated today, like, for example, TLS 1.0, 1.1, and possibly some others. Another thing that you might be interested in is, for example, remote access and administration software like TeamViewer, AnyDesk, Remote Desktop Protocol, and so on. This kind of software can be used to fully control the machine that the system is installed on. And it's not only used by administrators today, but also it's used by attackers, because using this software, they can very easily to get their own files on the device where they can create the, for example, TeamViewer session. So we had seen a couple of examples where the attacker was using those software to get the malware on the device, because this communication is typically encrypted, and it's very usual because administrators also use this kind of tools. Another example can be, for example, a VPN access or tools that can create different kind of tunnels that can be used to exfiltrate data from your infrastructure, or to use applications that can be denied or not allowed to use on the network. The last one can be, for example, unwanted or malicious applications like coin miners, peer-to-peer software, and so on. Maybe I will show you another example of communication to the Tor network that we had identified during one of our audits. And as you can see, our system detected 5 events that were giving us the information that there is some device in the network that is actively communicating with the Tor network. The Tor network today is used or can be used for communication of either hackers or either some other persons that want to hide their communication from the outside of the world and also from the internet. So it can be used for distributing malware. It can be used for some other communication. Basically, if you want to communicate anonymously in the internet, usually you decide to choose Tor, because that's one of the top network that can provide you this kind of functionality today. How it was connected or detected in our system. You can see that Mendel detected Tor communication, and let me have a look at the detail, because this detail will give us the information about how and why it was connected. You can see that there are two kinds of events. The first one is that Mendel had discovered that this system is connecting or communicating with blacklisted IP addresses that is on the list of Tor nodes. And the second, we had identified that there is a typical SSL traffic that looks like a Tor communication. Because maybe I will show you an example of that. If you are connecting to the Tor network, you are usually using domains that are randomly generated, but they still are using some pattern. And this pattern in the domain generation can be spotted on the network, and that's how our system can detect this kind of behavior. Oh, it looks like that in this case, it cannot show us the domain, but I think we can see the domain in the packet bytes, and it's right here. You can see that the domain name is very random. It looks like 66 F7 KQ FT6 and something else. So it doesn't look like a domain that a normal user would remember and would be using in their browsers. During the security audits of the network communication that we've been performing for our customers, we have found a lot of interesting, usual and also unusual things. We had seen a lot of misconfiguration in the internal systems. Like, for example, it was possible to use the Wake Online functionality to turn on some servers on the network. We had also seen a lot of misconfiguration in firewalls that were allowing basically anybody connect from the internet to the systems on the internal network. We had seen lots of different kind of malware, either the malware that was used as a remote access tools, or either malware that was basically delivering ransomware to the infrastructure that had been attacked or should be attacked by this kind of malware. We had also seen a couple of examples of bad segmentation. The example of bad segmentation was the case of the restaurant and their customers that were able to connect to some other devices on the network of the building. It's also very usual today to see a lot of unauthorized applications, like, for example, coin miners that are basically coining or mining Bitcoins, Ethereum, and sort of other cryptocurrencies that are valuable today, and so on. We have seen also a lot of cases of devices connected to the networks where they shouldn't be. Like, for example, a lot of employees will bring today their own devices like tablets, laptops, and just connect them to the private office network. And these devices shouldn't be there because they can be infected. The infection can spread among the other parts of network, and that's the reason why this should also be denied either by policy or by other security mechanisms. So that was the network security audit. Let me now to compare it a bit with the penetration testing that you might be already familiar with. The goal of penetration testing is usually to find possibilities of or vectors of attacking either a web application, network parameter, or specific devices on the network. Usually during penetration testing, you are looking for a easiest and a shortest path to get into the internal infrastructure, get there something that will enable you a remote access, or if we are testing web applications, the primary goal is to get the access of the underlying for example, operating system, so you can take the full control of the server that is running the application, or for example, get the data from the database that the web application is using. If I should compare this penetration testing to security auditing and network monitoring or monitoring of network traffic, the goal of the monitoring and security auditing of the network traffic is a bit different, because if you are auditing and monitoring traffic, you are not doing this just once a year or once a month. You are doing this constantly. And if you are having this data about what is happening in your network every day, it gives you advantage to see the changes on the network that we will be talking about. It's also giving you the advantage to see the misconfigurations on the network. It can also show you the presence of the malware or threats that are already in the infrastructure. That's, for example, something that penetration tests will probably not show to you because they are not looking for it. Also, with monitoring of network traffic, the great advantage is that it's constant. So you constantly see what is happening on your network, what is changing, what kind of mistakes are happening there, if there is an infection or not. With penetration tests, you usually do them on, for example, May. And if an administrator decides to do some change to the network and bring some possibly new threats, then you have to do the penetration testing again, because otherwise you will not be able to identify or spot the new kind of vectors that can be used to attack your devices, your perimeter, or some other assets on the network that you might have. So that's all about the network security auditing and how it can be done using the product Mendel developed by GREYCORTEX company. I thank you for your presence, for your time and attention. And I think I will give the word back to my colleague Pavel, and maybe we can have a look at the questions if there are any that hasn't been answered yet.
Thank you, Misha, for the presentation. Yes, there have been a couple of questions. Basically, you will receive the question and answers also as if, within the feedback email after this webinar. What we dealt with is that we are monitoring both north, south, and east-west traffic using deep packet analysis or deep packet inspection for that. There was a question about retention. Basically, we don't limit this. It is based on the storage and the type and volume of the traffic. By default, it's between 2 months and 2 years. Being able to isolate devices when it's needed in a critical moment, yes, this is possible via integration with third-party systems such as network access control firewalls, etc. I think Michal already explained some behavior techniques we are using for detection threats other than signatures or other threat intelligence. There was a question about Active Directory, and then last question was on, and Misha, this one has not been answered yet. IPX on the network, and in one of the slides it was mentioned, and it reminds of NetWare.
Yeah, I can answer that. The IPX is a very old protocol that has been used, I think maybe past, maybe in the novel time either. And we had it on the slide because we detected this kind of attack using the IPX on the infrastructure that was still using this kind of protocol. And we detected an attack that was targeting this specific infrastructure, and the malware was specifically written using this protocol to get the information from the systems that were using that. That's the reason why we put it on the slide, and that's also the reason why we have a detection of this protocol when it's used on the network.
So thank you, Micho. Thank you very much for your attention, for your time, and we'll be happy to invite you to our next webinars as well. Thank you, everybody, and have a great rest of the day and week. Goodbye.